Oregon's got their latest recruitment. Let's break it down. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you have not already, you should like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 whether you win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Our Locked On recruiting insider, Brian Smith, is here, brought to you, as always, by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. Let's just dive right into it, Brian. Cooper Perry chooses the Ducks. There were a number of other teams in the running. We'll get to Rashad Samples and how he kind of put them over the hump here. But your impression of Cooper Perry is what?
Slot receiver that could also play outside at times, especially after he gets a year or so into the weight program in Oregon. And this is a kid that will make a ton of people miss. He is not your typical 180-pound white kid running around on a football field. He is elusive as hell. And quite honestly, he's really strong for his size. He just needs to add more of it. He bounces off guys like a pinball. Pretty good open field speed and just really natural at catching the football away from his body. It wouldn't surprise me if he played center field in baseball, if he was the point guy in basketball, etc. Everything he does hand-eye coordination-wise is tremendous.
Yeah, and I think that sort of versatility can always play, gives you a lot of options. We talk about that a lot on the defensive side of the ball. You know, maybe one of Oregon's cornerbacks end up making the switch to safety. You've talked about Sione Laulea maybe doing that before, but you talk about his ability to play inside and outside. That makes me think of Gary Bryant Jr., who's on Oregon's roster right now, just like very solid. And Bryant, you know, I think I talked about him the other day on the show. I think he projects kind of as Oregon's number 4 receiver. He could get a push from Jurion Dickey, who's mega talented for playing time this year. But is that the sort of player that you see with Perry? Just everything solid, but nothing spectacular necessarily.
Except for the make you miss part, he's just really good at everything. But again, this is a kid that does everything football-wise the way it should be done. And he just scores. He always seems to be a little faster, a little smarter, a step ahead, using his vision to cut through the right hole on a punt return or on a screen. Whatever it is, he'll figure it out.
He's at 6'1", a $185. So I hear what you're saying on, you know, the weight room aspect of it, and maybe bulk up just a little bit more. That of course will probably remind Oregon fans a lot of Troy Franklin and Dante Thornton. They were known as the skinnies when they got to college, and they of course bulked up considerably. Franklin is, I mean, just huge compared to what he was his freshman year. But, you know, Perry, a guy who's the number 1 player in the state of Arizona, what does it say to you that the Ducks are able to go in and get the top player in that state?
Well, they did it last year too. So I don't think it's even that surprising anymore, because Oregon and SC and everybody are in the Big Ten now. I mean, no offense to Arizona or Arizona State. They play in a league those kids don't want to play in. They're going to lose these battles more often than not. You know, I'm not trying to pick on Arizona State, but they're going to have a tough uphill battle when SC or Oregon, Texas, you know, Florida State, somebody like that comes in and offers these Phoenix kids. It's not going to be easy. Oregon should always be in that race. They've gotten kids out of Arizona for years. Chip Kelly certainly did, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon.
Yeah, Perry, a 4-star recruit, ranks as the number 27 receiver in the country according to 24/7 Sports. And you like a lot of what you've seen with them, especially the make you miss, like you said. But what is it besides getting in the weight room that, you know, makes him maybe not quite as highly rated a recruit as some other receivers in the 2025 class?
He's from Phoenix. He's not around a ton of scouts. It's nothing against him, but location matters, bro. If he were 15 minutes from Atlanta, he'd be ranked higher. I pretty much guarantee you that. It's just the way it is. I've talked about that before. A lot of the guys in my industry live in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. If you're not in one of those 3 states, it's a disadvantage. So with that being stated, he still kills everybody, and his offer list included a lot of big-time schools, and I'll go with their opinion over anybody in the recruiting industry. So I think he could play at Texas or Alabama. I'm not saying he's going to be the number one at those schools, but he could play. And especially if he's in the slot where he's getting single coverage and they're having to double somebody else, a bigger receiver that's big time. Maybe it's DeCorian Moore somewhere down the road. You never know. Then you're one-on-one with a guy that's really crafty, athletic, and has great hands. That's where their slot receivers kill it. He may be their third option in a year and lead them in receptions because he's always a guy that's single covered. That's fine. You want to matriculate the ball down the field. Oregon likes to dink and dunk a lot. This is the guy that'll get you a lot of yak with those kind of passes. His offense at his high school does that with him, and he's really difficult to bring to the ground. So good fit for Oregon all the way around.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Oregon will kind of be looking for next year without Tez Johnson, who is not a super down the field shot sort of guy because he's on the smaller side. Now, Tez is smaller than Perry, who's 6'1". Tez is, I think, listed at 5'11".
5'9.5", 5'10".
Yeah, 5'9", 5'9.5", 5'10", 5'6". That's kind of where Tez Johnson. I don't think he's actually 5'6". He's pretty small, but again, he's so agile, and Tez Johnson's such a good route runner that, he's going to leave a really big void after this year. And Oregon had a decommitment in the 2025 class at the wide receiver position, which is why, this is another good sign for the Ducks on the trail to go and kind of fill that particular slot. But, Oregon's got 2 wide receivers in the class now. Cooper Perry and Dallas Wilson is the other one who's a little bit higher rated, coming out of your neck of the woods down there in Tampa, Florida. Do you think this will be it for Oregon at the receiver position in 2025? And I leave that open-ended 100% on purpose.
Well, there's always other guys, and they're recruiting DeCorian, who we'll talk about in a second, but it just depends on the player that would want to come. And Dallas is being recruited by everybody. I've heard that some people in the state of Florida really do think he'll end up at Oregon, which I never really thought he would. That's a long way for a Florida kid, especially an East Tampa kid. Like that's not normal. But at the same time, Oregon's got something going. He's a fan, so you never know. Now they get Perry. They're after a few guys. They can really focus on the elite kids. And unless it's one of them, they're in pretty good shape. Maybe they take a portal kid. That's about it.
Yeah, and I think when you stack the 2024 receiver class as well with what Oregon is, probably going to have on the roster from previous classes, guys like Jurion Dickey and Kyler Casper in the fold, I think Oregon's receiver room is just continuing to look very, very solid. But, we'll talk more about Rashad Samples in a little bit. But, Samples, his father's the head coach at Duncanville High School, which is where DeCorian Moore plays, the LSU commit. Is it too tinfoil hat-ish, Brian, to suggest that could be even more likely than it was before?
I guess it'd have to help. That's the program where his coach is at, like his kid. How could it hurt, I guess, is the best way to define that. I'm sure that played a factor in it. But in his defense, and looking him up and researching him, he was an NFL assistant at 26. That is like rarefied air. That is really, so he can coach. Oregon's past the point where they're going to hire somebody predominantly as a recruiter because they already have top 10 classes anyway. If you can't coach, don't apply. There's certain schools that'll hire somebody like him because they need the recruits. Oregon's not one of them. So I'm guessing that DeCorian wants to go somewhere and be developed. Ohio State, Texas, LSU, Oregon. These are pretty typical programs that send kids to the NFL. It's not shocking at the schools that he's looking at. So I think they're in shot for getting him, but I have no idea where he's going to go at this point. But that's a really nice piece to put in your puzzle, that his coach is your assistant that's recruiting, and that's his father.
At the very least, it's got to help you be able to get a phone call, a conversation, a visit, something. You're just kind of strengthening whatever connection level is already there. But I think Oregon with 2 receiver commits in 2025, I won't be surprised to see 2, maybe 3 more. I'd say 3 is probably the max number of wideouts that Oregon would go for additionally, with Cooper Perry and Dallas Wilson already committed. But I want Brian's thoughts on Rashad Samples, because I feel like I am reading a new article every day about how good this guy is on the recruiting trail. And I'm talking to you all every day, especially the everydayers, about how great Game Time is. Now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. You can save up to 60% buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you want to go to. Game Time has got it. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Whatever you want, Game Time's got it. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. And download Game Time today. Get the app, last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So, Brian, there was a departure of Carlos Loughlin, who I was very high on, as were many others. And there is the entrance now of Rashad Samples, who looks good in Oregon gear, by the way. But then again, who doesn't? The Nike gear looks pretty fantastic, if you ask me. I'm still waiting on these Generation O uniforms to actually, showcase what they are. Yeah, I don't know if you knew about this, Brian, but they announced that there's going to be a Generation O, and there was a hint of, the DeAnthony Thomas era of Oregon football and incorporating that or bringing those sorts of uniforms back. That can go in a lot of different directions, but we didn't get any pictures. We just kind of have this tease right now, and maybe they get unveiled at the spring game. Maybe it's after the spring game. I don't know. Anyway, let's talk Rashad Samples here. So, Samples comes to Oregon from Arizona State. He's been at SMU. He's been at TCU. He's been at Texas. Those are all schools in the Lone Star State, for those who are not intimately familiar. He was also with the Rams briefly as a position coach, as Brian mentioned, at 26 years old. What is your impression of him as a recruiter?
Well, he knows the Metroplex, as we call it, really well, and that's Dallas. That's his home base. That's where his dad's still a coach at Duncanville, which is the best program in the state of Texas. And he's been a guy that's also coached in Phoenix, which is a pretty good city for football recruiting. Now, it didn't used to be, but over the last 25 years, it's really risen up. I think he's one of the most perfect guys to be on their staff. Just talking about recruiting and forgetting the coaching. Played in Texas, played college in Texas. He's coached in college in Texas. And now he's coached in Arizona and he's coached in California. Those states are prime for the Ducks. I mean, this is not something I have to really lay out and get into a lot of detail. Oregon always recruits Texas. They did, especially under Chip Kelly. And they've always hit Arizona hard. And California is their base because the state of Oregon just doesn't produce enough. So he has the ability to help the offensive staff, the defensive staff, break in with some new coaches they may not have known. Because if he doesn't know them, his dad does. In the state of Texas, that state is really tight. Like, if you're not from there, it matters, if you know what I mean. So that's going to help. I think everything about it's positive. You're not going to replace Carlos Loughlin, like I told you the last time. That's a guy I think is as good a running back coach as there is in the country, but you couldn't have done much better. So I think the Ducks are in pretty good shape, all things considered.
Brian, there were 27 high school commits to the Ducks that signed their national letters of intent back in December. 27. Of those 27, how many would you guess, just off the top of your head, are from the state of Texas for the 2024 recruiting class, the highest ranked recruiting class in Oregon football history?
3. One. I'll be damned.
There's one kid from there. So now there were 10 kids out of the state of California, right? That's Oregon's backyard. They've had a lot of success with places like Mater Dei, like St. John Bosco, and the like. Of course, Aiden Breland coming from Mater Dei, and Mateo Uyungule in 2023 from St. John Bosco. Like, there are a lot of big high schools there. But can one coach like a Rashad Samples dramatically impact the recruiting footprint that a school like Oregon has on a particular state like Texas?
He can, but I think it's more important to put it this way. If they wanted to get 5 kids out of Texas every year, they could. But are they going to get 5 kids that are top 300 in the country? Maybe not. It's more important for him to land that one guy. They came in second or third for a bunch of guys from that state. I know there's a few guys from Texas this year they're not leading for. They're really trying. It's just hard to get Texas kids to go all the way to Oregon. It's always going to be hard. So they need to get like one more kid a year out of Texas, but he just needs to help them in their backyard. Arizona and California is still more important. Getting one extra kid out of Texas is more realistic. If you're talking about making it their baseline, that's not going to end well for Oregon. It always needs to be California. Don't break the wheel. It's already spinning. Just find a little more shiny objects to put on it.
Yeah.
One more kid a year. That's really what he needs to. I mean, a splash player. Decoria Moore obviously would be one, but another good 4-star defensive lineman, whatever, which Dan happens to like a lot. Those kinds of players.
Yeah, and in the 2023 class, Oregon had 6 kids from the state of Texas. So, you average that out and it comes to, let me do calculations in my head real quick. 3.5. Brian's got it quicker than me. Brian's better at math. I can see. So I think that, having samples is certainly a boon to Oregon's recruiting for the next couple of years. Now, I also talked about him here on the show, and I know some fans get antsy thinking about this sort of stuff, but it's just a reality. I think he's someone who wants to be an offensive coordinator and or a head coach one day. And you look at his track record and the way he's been a bit of a mercenary. He's a young guy. He's now got an opportunity with the Ducks. I think, like Carlos Loughlin, 2 years is probably the maximum amount of time that Oregon can keep him before, they either have to make him the OC in-house or he's going to get an offensive coordinator opportunity somewhere. And I say that because he's someone who's been a running backs coach. He's someone who's been a receivers coach. He's someone who has assistant head coach in his title with Oregon, which is not something granted to a lot of position coaches out there. He was also the passing game coordinator while at Arizona State. And that's a really, really common jump in both the NFL and college to say, you're a passing game coordinator. Now you're going to be, an offensive coordinator. Am I crazy for thinking that he's either going to be Oregon's offensive coordinator in 2026 or he won't be on the Oregon staff anymore and the Ducks will have to utilize, his recruiting chops while they've got him?
I think that it's likely he'll be gone. I mean, if he got a job at like Texas State as the head coach or something is also a possibility. There's going to be those schools kind of on the verge of D1 or low D1, Sun Belt, MAC. Anything like that's a possibility. It depends on what he wants to do. Yeah, something like that. All the North Texas is 15 minutes from the greater Dallas area. So, I mean, it's a fit. So, good call there. He could be the OC at TCU next year. If you're going to get a $400,000 raise to go somewhere, it's kind of hard to – I get it. So, the best thing you can do, it's kind of like recruiting at quarterback. Kids are going to leave. You sign the best one you can as often as you can. Where the chips fall, so be it. Assistant coaches that can recruit and coach, they're not going to stay long. Those days are over. Like I remember Tom Osborne's staff at Nebraska. He had guys on his staff for 15-plus years. Those days are never happening again. It's over. So there's too much money for a guy to go take a similar job, even if he doesn't like that school. You're not going to turn down like a $400,000 raise, sometimes more than that. It's just too much money.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a more positive angle of looking at it for the Ducks is, if he leaves somewhere to be an OC, but then a year or two later, Will Stein gets a head coaching opportunity somewhere, and we'd be talking, and we'd be talking like 2027, 2028 or so. I'm not trying to rush anybody out the door here, but yeah, I think that opportunity could be presented. It's why you want to, foster these sorts of relationships and make sure that you can showcase, I think as Lanning has, that you can come to Oregon as an assistant coach and you can go and succeed elsewhere. And I think the University of Oregon in general kind of has that sort of reputation. But I want to close on Rashad Samples, and then we'll get to some film breakdowns later in the show as well. But I want to close on this with Samples. Is it normal, or have you seen before an instance where a guy goes from coaching receivers to running backs, or receivers and running backs at Arizona State, to come and be the running backs coach at Oregon? Do you think that alters, the way that he recruits or how he's viewed by high school recruits?
Having the Oregon symbol will help him, I would think. I mean, it's a higher ranked program than what the two schools in the state of Arizona are. I mean, the kids there are getting recruited ardently by their local schools. The question is, can he really help them beat out SC for kids? That's their competition. It's always been their competition. That's not going to change. And then can he get, again, he's not going to get necessarily bulk players out of Texas, because I think his job will be more to get an elite kid or two, but he might help him with the portal out of Texas too, because he'll know every kid that's come through there in that state. So that's the back end, but it's getting that 4 or 5 star that they wouldn't have got otherwise without Samples on staff.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Oregon fans are hoping that five-star wideout and current LSU commit DeCorian Moore is the first guy that he really helps, get to Oregon. And when you got both Samples and Junior Adams going after somebody, you can't dislike Oregon's chances there, because those two guys are both phenomenal coaches and outstanding recruiters with well-established reputations on the trail. But we've still got one more thing to get to with Brian on the show today. A couple of 2024 film breakdowns for incoming true freshmen, both at the linebacker position, I think. I also think you should go check out FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing. Mariners won as I recorded this show, so I'm in a slightly better mood, but I won't be happy till they win the World Series, of course. But anyway, FanDuel, no matter what, is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 whether you win or lose. It is that easy. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use with a great interface. So just ask yourself this one important question. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet an automatic win. Oregon football wins are not automatic. They're not given, but wins at FanDuel with your first bet are. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Brian, let's do some film breakdowns here. Been doing this for every commit or every recruit rather, because they're not just commits. They are future Oregon Ducks in the 2024 recruiting cycle. A couple of guys at the linebacker position, at least that's where they're listed. Why don't we start with the guy who definitely is going to play in that spot? One of the higher rated defensive recruits for Oregon in this 2024 class, Brayden Platt out of Yelm, Washington.
He's one of my favorite kids to watch film of, and I know the following is very mean, but I thoroughly enjoy this. He's playing against kids that have no business being on the field with him. And some of the collisions, they're significant. Let's just put it like that. It's like a Mack truck hitting a Yugo. It's pretty bad. And he is just physical with everything he does. I personally like his running back film even better, because you can tell by the angles some of those kids take to hit him. Did they really want to do it? Did they really?
I wouldn't.
Platt is 235, 240 as a senior in high school, and it looks like he's 30 years old. So he's just one of those kids that's really developed, and he's taking the weight room very seriously. And he is down. He reminds me of John Riggins. Like that would be the comparison. That's before your time, early 80s Redskin. Like he was an all-pro, Super Bowl winner and all that, and he had no fear. This guy's in that realm. Now, I assume the Ducks will play him at middle backer, but I think he'll play some defensive end and outside linebacker and move him around because he's just a football player. He is a blast to watch. Physically, though, like I don't really know what the hell they're going to do with him in the weight room program, except just increase his endurance. He's kind of maxed out. Like this is who he is. It's very, very rare that I say that about a player, but he took to it early. I'm guessing his dad or somebody in his family's into lifting, but there's nowhere else to put muscle. So unless he wants to move to D-line, that would be the only other thing that he could do. So instinctive, powerful, and downhill, brother. That is a very powerful young man.
Yeah, when you combine those traits and you think about the running back component as well, he reminds me of Noah Sewell. That's kind of my comp for him, who had a great career with Oregon, of course, multiple all Pac-12 selections. I think he was all freshman and then all Pac-12 second team 2 years in a row, RIP Pac. But I think that Platt is someone who comes in, he is very big. And when you look at the way Oregon has run this 4-2-5, Brian, typically they've got one linebacker on the field who's a little bit quicker and one who's a little bit bulkier to play against the run. Now, Justin Jacobs is somewhat of a combination of both, but Jeff Bossa is definitely a little bit quicker. He used to play safety, and Jacobs is, at least a little bit more of a bruising linebacker on the field. And then, the next combination last year was often Devin Jackson, Jamal Hill. And those guys both had high-end speed, frankly, at the linebacker position. But I look at Platt and I see a little bit more of that kind of run stopper position. How do you think he holds up in coverage?
That is the million-dollar question, because scheme is everything. Is he covering slot receivers? No. But you've got to put him in a position not to have to. If they can, and I know they're not going to advertise this, if there's a stoppage in play or anything else and it's a passing down, either he's in and blitzing or he's out. That's my guess. They don't want him covering people. He's 240, 250. How many running backs is he really going to cover? But at the same time, he's athletic enough to at least be competitive. And you can't win every battle. The offense carries the advantage now because they can go 13 personnel and still be in 5 wide. Tight ends are different than they used to be. So you're going to get exposed once in a while, but he's also going to make plays for you in the backfield that other guys don't on first and second down. So it's a pretty good trade-off.
So the other guy I want to talk about is one of, if not the most interesting, in that, I mean, there's a big question mark of sorts next to his name in this recruiting class for the Ducks, and that's Kingston Lopa, who is listed, like Brayden Platt, as a 4-star linebacker, but I don't know, other than having the LB next to their name on 24/7 Sports, how much these guys really have in common as recruits. And Lopa, I'll read you what Greg Biggins of 24/7 Sports said about him. Quote, Lopa's one of the region's most versatile players, could even play 3 to 4 different positions at the college level. He started safety and receiver, but probably projects best as an outside backer who could even grow into an edge rusher down the line. Haven't seen a guy like that before. I think you look at someone who played safety, 6'5", Oregon fans are going to look at Brian Addison, but I'm thinking of Isaiah Simmons here. Maybe not quite as physically freaky as Simmons was when he was at Clemson, but you don't see a lot of players that get listed, especially coming in as true freshmen, as, hey, he could play at any single level of the defense. He could put on weight and play edge. Yeah. He could have some weight, play linebacker. He could play safety. I don't think they see him as a corner, but what do you see from him?
I see him as a safety that'll be a strong safety, and he'll be a rover, kind of that hybrid spot. I don't see the edge. Biggins has been around forever, and he's great in the business, but I don't think he's going to gain the weight to be a true edge. That doesn't mean he can't be a guy that comes off the edge on a blitz, but like when I think edge, I mean, that means a guy has to be able to play the run on 1st and 10. No way in hell he's going to play edge on 1st and 10. He's not going to be 230. That's pretty much like the minimum you'd have to be. He's like 190-ish.
Yeah, 190 is what he's listed at on 24/7.
So let's say he's 200. That would still be 30 pounds to gain, and that would be a few years. And he's a hitter. He needs to learn to wrap up more. He's too much of a shoulder hitter right now, but he can run. He's instinctive, and he's good in open field. So I would put him overhang / hybrid and strong safety, and until he outgrows it. I mean, there could be certain circumstances they're playing 5 wide. Some team in the Big Ten, not that many of them do it, maybe Ohio State, he plays some linebacker. That's different. There are teams like that. I mean, when Drew Brees was at Purdue, teams would put corners and safeties at inside linebacker because they never ran the ball. And they would just play with all DBs. You could do something like that if you went up against a team like Ohio State and was just throwing it everywhere. But otherwise, let him play downhill from strong safety or the hybrid spot.
Yeah, I think Brian Addison's a pretty solid comp, who's a good player for the Ducks. You know, he started on offense, and, you know, Lopa's got a little background on offense, playing the tight end position as well. I don't think that's where Oregon wants him to play. And, you know, that nickel star position that Oregon's got on defense, sometimes it's a corner, sometimes it's a safety, sometimes it's, you know, Brandon Johnson, the transfer coming in from Duke, is literally listed positionally as a nickel. At least that's what he played over there with the Blue Devils. And I think that that's a really tough position to find, because you need someone who is a defensive back that's just prolific against the run. I think the best guy in, you know, the 5 defensive back scheme that we've seen Oregon run for really quite a while now, going back to the Andy Avalos days, Javon Holland is the best that I've seen with the Ducks. Like that's the gold standard right there, because Holland was, you know, someone who could blitz a little, but he was such a sure tackler, and he could also have great coverage skills over the top. He played, you know, at the back end of the defense really well. So you talked about the tackling component with Kingston Lopa. Does that make you think he's probably not someone that plays as a true freshman? Oh, Brian just hopped out. So Brian might have had to go, but. Oh, Brian hopped back in. There's Brian. We lost Brian.
I don't know what happened.
For a hot sec. I thought you were ditching us early. But back to Kingston Lopa here. Do you think that, you know, his need to work on form tackling a little bit makes it harder for him to play as a true freshman?
Absolutely. They want guys that are going to bring you to the ground. He's always just hammered people. It doesn't work that way at the Power 4 level. There are running backs in the Big Ten that will laugh as they run down the sideline. So, yeah, he's going to have to work on that. He's been the bigger, stronger guy, but that'll take care of itself in fall camp. It's no big deal.
Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network, brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Brian, thanks as always.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, go Ducks.